All right, there we go. This is Coin Pusher Reloaded's Post-mortem. Like I said, I compiled this. We are live here with Twitch chat. I compiled the notes on Friday for this, prepared this over the weekend. It's going to be very simple, very dry. If you're unfamiliar with what postmortems are, they are a analytical view of what you did right, what you did wrong, what did you learn about the game that you made, and this is so that you and the team can reflect on what you made, can have a bit of a retrospective, and then take those lessons and that information onto the next game, right? And correct the incorrect behavior and double down on the correct behavior moving forward. And therefore, ideally, your games get better and better, and your production gets better and better too, since those are separate but, of course, very related. Before we get into that, though, I know that there were a lot of people on my YouTube channel and on Twitch here and in my DMs that were very confused about why we went from this, our big open world RPG, very deep, a lot of deep systems, very expansive, to something like this. And I think that's a fair concern or question about it. And the answer is pretty simple. With this, we wanted to make a team that was about 30 people large and get a publisher and create a production that was 3 years in length. And so this was a very traditional game in that sense, and a traditional studio approach. Going from that to Coin Pusher, we decided that we wanted to work on something that was self-published. And so of course we can't be diving into some 30-person large team project. And so that was one of the reasons why we felt that this was a smart move to take from early stages to full production and then post it up on Steam to give us that experience, to let us understand what the production and post-production cycles look like for our studio, since that is traditionally something that is reserved for specialized people at companies, whereas, you know, like the average designer or programmer like me and Cuthbert, we don't really have any work to do on the Steam side or on the production side and marketing side ever in games. So this was a really good experience for us to gain that and understand how much time it takes, what kind of effort is involved, and therefore when we're planning our future games, we can say, okay, well, we know that for Coin Pusher Reloaded, we needed to do this, this, and this, and this to get the game released, and this is how much time it took us to do, us two people. And then we can add that on, or we can scale it up depending on how we feel it's going to scale, or something larger, right? Like a sequel to this game. So keeping that in mind, we can dive into the post-mortem finally. Obviously this is I made this very, very quickly. There are 3 backgrounds that you'll see. Purple background, like this is more like an informational background or like a neutral background. If you see a red background, it means that this is something that I want to focus on that was largely bad for us. And if it's green, it means that it was something that was largely good for us. So of course, an intro slide like this, nice and purple, just informational. This is what Coin Dozer, my original project 8 years ago, used to look like, and this is what Coin Pusher Reloaded looks like now after the experience that we've gained. So why did we work on it? Coin Dozer was a prototype I worked on in early 2017 while learning UE4. And during the development of Colden Chronicles, we joked about resurrecting it. Near the end of Colden Chronicles' first playable, we had a free week to run the first ever microjam. Our aim was to develop a successor to Coin Dozer, but make it even better than the original. Our goal was not to make it an actual product, and that is important. So the microjam 2025 ran from May 5th to May 9th. It was a solo casual game jam. You know, we didn't work on it after hours or anything. We didn't push ourselves too much. It was intended to be a distraction to prove prowess and progress, right? It was something that we did right before Colden Chronicles was going to be pitched. So I didn't want anything that was going to exhaust me too much, that would distract me too much. But it was just kind of like, well, we had an extra week to fill. We finished up Colden Chronicles stuff early, so we threw it in there and decided to have a little bit of fun. It was about 40 hours of work, which I think was pretty fair for a week-long game jam. It was roughly, about 1 week of work. And I think it was successful from a game standpoint. Obviously not artistically, but me not being an artist, I think that's pretty fair for what it was. And it was a fully functional game. It ran perfectly fine. It had a beginning, it had an end, and it had a lot of little systems and fun things to it. However, this is where the first mistakes occurred. Because the game jam was fine. But we constantly talked about not building a shoddy foundation with Colton Chronicles, and then we did exactly that with Coin Pusher. What we should have done is make a new project, build again from scratch, code properly, and game jam code can afford to be shit. A full product's code cannot. We constantly talked about this at length, and I did the exact opposite of what I said that we should do for Golden Chronicles. Very dumb. And this was, I would think, one of the biggest mistakes that we made with it, and one that we should have corrected, but we didn't. We naively thought it wouldn't be much work to just slap some, a fresh coat of paint on here, throw some models in, and get the game finished. We should have taken the time to do the proper design instead of assuming the base was good enough. Simple as that. So, it's the first mistake. It sounds like it's small, but as I've talked about previously, small mistakes in your pre-production or going to vertical slice can be the most important ones that you should not make, because they'll spiral out of control and you'll keep adding debt, and that debt will add more debt, and it keeps compounding the interest until here you are with a game that if you had a good code foundation, you probably could finish in a month, but then it took us 3 months to finish the game. So yeah, big mistake for initially on. Now let's talk about the game design, and this was my aspect. This is the good part of the game's design. I think the mini games were fun, but they were basic. And I think the ATM was the most enjoyable of the two between this and the gallery. I thought the ATM itself was self-contained, enjoyable. It had some fun visuals. I think the randomization of the name, number, and CVC was fun and immersive. And then the game itself was built upon Mastermind, which is already a tried and tested game itself. The gallery, though, it was a last-minute addition, right? The game was simple to understand, and I think this was also really good too. It just was easy to jump into. Your goal was to get the crown. You get the crown by collecting 3 platinum chips, and you spawn a platinum chip when you collect 1 of each poker chip. That's it. The minute-to-minute gameplay achieves a casual, relaxing desire. This was what we wanted to make, was something that was fun, had a no-lose scenario, and you could just kind of enjoy it and space out, and your mind can kind of go blank while playing it. And I think that it does achieve that. For the intended runtime, the game doesn't feel like it outstays its welcome. We talk a lot about gameplay loops on the stream and how every loop has an expiration date. Coin Pusher Reloaded is no different. Its loops have an expiration date, but for the 30 minutes of playtime that you'll get from it roughly, I don't feel like those expiration dates are hit. So the game, to me, stays enjoyable from beginning to end until most people will probably finish it and then move on to the next game. Now the bad. The gallery minigame was added as a last-minute addition, and it shows. On the Friday of that game jam, we discovered that we had some extra time and didn't know what to do with it. So we decided to add one more minigame to the mix, and that was the gallery minigame. But I was rushing to get it done because I knew that that was the last day of the game jam before I had to go to pitch Golden Chronicles. And, as we know, it shows. The gallery minigame is serviceable. It doesn't really do anything special, and it repeats the same cycle. Now, we did make it expandable to allow for multiple different, patterns of spawns. It does support that currently, but we never utilized that or added upon that. Theoretically, that is something that we could add in a patch going forward, you know, we could work on it for a day and make maybe 5 or 6 more patterns, and then it randomizes which one it chooses. However, there's an achievement tied to perfecting the minigame that would then need to be refactored a little bit, and it's not undoable, but the current release version only has that one pattern, and it's the less interesting of the two minigames for me. The game doesn't really provide the player with much strategy. I mean, I think this is a bad thing, but it is a casual game. I think this is a less important evil of the bad things that we did with the game's design. But I would like to rectify that in the sequel and make a game that does have a bit more depth and strategy to it, more mechanics and ways for you to optimize the way that you enjoy playing. But that's future talk. The power-ups were serviceable at best and generally boring. Those were the gold menu purchases, and I think that they were, I don't know, they were okay. They played on the mechanics that we had and they worked, but they weren't particularly interesting or changed the way that you played the game in any way. The game offers no meaningful progression, which is acceptable for a game jam, but not for a full product. You know, it's a 30-minute game. And if you're playing a game jam, you really don't expect gameplay to last longer than that anyways. But we did want to make a full product. And we initially wanted to price it at, you know, between $0 and $5, like $1 to $5, depending on how it ended up being. Clearly, we didn't reach that mark. And I think a lot of it was because we didn't reassess the game's design. The timeline for the game. Our initial estimate was about 1 month to finish things. It took closer to 3 months of on and off work with lots of overtime, a lot of stuff that I had to do off stream. And the timeline was greatly underestimated. But it still fell into a range of time that I feel was acceptable for the quality we delivered. If you compare our game on the market for free to other indie developers' games, especially first games, I do think that Coin Pusher Reloaded is above average, and not even by that small of an amount. But we can do better. Now for the bad of the timeline. Time extension put pressure on me, and I offloaded that pressure onto others like Rex, who was our artist. I should have accepted the time needed and inaccurate estimation, and allowed the game's development to proceed at a more healthy rate. This was a major mistake. We should have just said, you know what, this is taking more time than we expected. That's okay. Let's just do our best work with it. And we didn't do that. We kind of just kept pushing it, saying let's just get it released. And to, you know, I think that there is some fairness to that logic, but at the same time, this probably occurred primarily because of the initial mistake of not reassessing the game's design and rebuilding the game from scratch instead of building upon the game jam code. If we had actually done the right thing in pre-production and then taken a look at entering production with, you know, in a proper way, I think we could have avoided that. Speeding up production encouraged us to cut corners and work more independently, whereas I believe we needed to communicate more to reduce iteration and waste. And I think this did extend the timeline quite a bit, though not as much as maybe some other aspects. We worked independently because I had a lot of things to do on stream and off stream, and I didn't really have time to sit down, and I didn't think that I had time to sit down and discuss this in more detail with Rex, but we should have done that, and this also just exacerbated all the issues that we had. As for the code base, messy to say the least. As mentioned earlier, we should have done what we planned to do for Golden Chronicles. We should have created a new project from scratch, rebuilt the game from scratch, and put in proper pieces of code that were going to be workable. And I think the two biggest areas where we saw there being issues were input and gamepad, and the handling of widgets. And I think that while the game worked for mouse and keyboard, it was ultimately the decision to add gamepad support that impacted our timeline the worst. but we're going to get into that. Very little of the code base is usable in a sequel, and this is kind of a problem. Now, there isn't a whole lot of code that you would drag between the sequel, or between, Coin Pusher Reloaded and a theoretical sequel anyway. But there was some important foundational pieces to it, especially like gamepad and input support, that if we had done it properly, we could port over to the sequel and save ourselves a lot of time and trouble. We're going to have to remake that from scratch and do it properly for the sequel. It is what it is. Now we know. There were differences in blueprinting standards that I think created rifts in understanding as well. This is something that I would like to rectify for the sequel. Rex and I have a very different way of creating blueprints, and I think that needs to be standardized, and that we need to communicate about what we're trying to achieve and why we're using the things that we're using. And if we can do that, then we can create our code in a way that is a lot more acceptable between each other, and we prepare tools that are not completely foreign or innocuous to each other. Proper organization was often set aside in favor of speed. I was the main culprit of this, especially near the end when we realized that this was kind of just not going to be reusable in any way. Just do it dirty as long as it works, and then push it out, and we'll reassess this for the sequel. And that is what we have to do. But if we had done it right the first time, we wouldn't have to be in this case now. So this was a lesson learned. 3D art. Mesh quality was very high and realistic, working well with our lighting. I really liked the meshes that Rex made, and we didn't really have any problem with it from like a performance standpoint. Mainly, I would say materials were more of a problem than the meshes themselves were, and I think that Rex and I learned a lot about material usage with Lumen, and also if we want to do icon renders of our 3D art, that there are certain parameters that we're going to need to put in for the materials themselves. But overall, the materials, the meshes were very positive, and we did have to have a little bit of iteration, but not a crazy amount. They were very optimized. This was a good thing. Scene ran well. We ended up turning off Nanite to help with performance, since the scene wasn't complex enough. We initially had Nanite on, and I was like, well, how does performance run with it off in this scene since it isn't very complex? And it was better. So we kept Nanite off, and then kept Lumen on. Lighting. Lumen had significant problems with some of the rougher materials, especially earlier on. If you guys remember some of those scenes, we had a lot of like rougher materials being shown, and they were causing a bunch of flickering and lighting problems. It was not looking good, so we had to brighten up the scene and redo pretty much all the materials in the scene, and I think ultimately the game ended up looking worse for it from like just a general material standpoint, but the lighting itself was helped by that. So we did learn a lot about how to light a darker scene, and I think that we still have a lot more to learn about that as a whole. But Lumen is a tough cookie to crack. What is Nanite? I will tell you room size what Nanite is after this, because we're recording this for YouTube. We underwent far too much iteration to tweak the lighting. We had to save a lot of that tweaking for the end of the project, and I think that's where we decided to move away from the darker, grungy scene. As we can see here, it was relatively performant. We had to delete some of the lights that I think were hurting the scene's performance quite heavily. But it looks decent. I'm not unhappy with how it looks now, but I think that there are better ways that we can tweak Lumen to look better moving forward with the sequel. The next game's lighting will be something we have to think about carefully about from the start to avoid unnecessary iterations. I don't want to save lighting until the end. Again, I think that was a smart move for Coin Pusher Reloaded, but ultimately we need to think about it and learn exactly what parameters we need to set to get the look that we want. And I think that depending on how we set up the scene in the sequel, we can probably bake some lighting and then use Lumen reflections. So that will make performance a little bit better because we won't have to have real-time global illumination. We'll see. We'll see. But that is something that we need to think about from day one. VFX. We neglected this until the end. I think it was Black Knight in chat who mentioned, hey, it would be nice if you had some VFX. And I was like, oh yeah, we don't have any of those, do we? And I think the sequel could benefit from more VFX, 100%. I think that it looked nice, it was a great addition, good feedback, and we should probably add some more of it. However, I think that the current team that we have, me and Rex, lacks the expertise to do anything significant while keeping it performant. So we either need to keep it minimal, or we need to learn, and ideally the second. But now that we know we want more of it, I will we'll consult internally and decide if we want to delve a bit deeper into Niagara particle effects, or just try to find a way to keep it minimal, or even outsource that to somebody else during the production. Audio. Sound effects source was not the most consistent, but it worked. We didn't think getting sound effects for a coin pusher game would be as hard as it ended up being, and properly triggering certain sound effects seemed to be extremely challenging, so we opted to skip that. Notable one would be the sliding of coins across the table, something that you would obviously normally hear during one of these games, and we decided not to include that because it seemed like it would be easy to trigger but hard to make performance, so we decided not to do that. Music, however, was incredible, and I would love to have more tracks for the sequel. Only major wish would be that there would be more loopable tracks for extended playtime, because I think that the one track, which is about 5 minutes in length, worked fine for 30 minutes of gameplay, but if we have longer gameplay, then we're going to need more tracks. Localization. Implementation was much easier than anticipated. It didn't take me very long to learn the localization dashboard. A little bit confusing, but we did learn it and it worked well. Wasn't a whole lot of issues with it. Finding localizers was the most challenging, but working with community members was more preferable than going with a larger company. So we did find people in the end to help us localize the game, and finding those people was challenging, but once we found them, they all worked within a pretty fast amount of time and did a very good job. We were smart to finish the game and store strings before seeking localization. Usually this is something that a lot of companies can't do very well, usually because of like physical copies. For people who don't know, you have to make a physical copy gold way sooner than a digital copy, so that physical copy needs to have that localization go gold sooner too, sometimes months in advance or even longer, and therefore you do need to, go content complete at a certain point. So I think we're fine in this case, and I think that with the sequel we can probably be fine as well by doing it in the same fashion. Focus on English, focus on making the widgets scalable from the start, and keep it in your mind what it's going to be, even using like ChatGPT just to throw some, or Google Translate to throw some strings in to translate, just to see how a widget might respond to those different languages. And then once you're done with the game, go complete, finish up the store page, and then send all that into your localizers in one big batch to reduce iteration. Hey Lepus, this is a presentation. We are recording for YouTube, but welcome. Only 1 to 2 lines needed iteration, and that was nice. It was very simple. It was very, very good. I think that overall, the localizers seemed to enjoy the big Google Sheet with context. I didn't really have any complaints. There were just a couple of questions about some of the context that I made, but honestly, once I gave them the spreadsheet, people generally worked independently without too much question or issue that they needed to bring to me, so that was very nice. However, if expanding the core game concept, so making a sequel, we do need a proper CSV to PO tool or pipeline. 100%. It was okay copying the strings we had from the spreadsheet to the PO tool, the PO edit. However, that's just not going to be something I want to do for a full game, so I know this now, I'll keep this in mind, and then we can have a tool. Either I can do it through, I can probably do it through Excel. There should be a way, maybe. Yeah, there should be a way to do it through Excel, probably. And at the very least, what I would need to do is copy the columns from Google Sheets to my Excel spreadsheet where I have my export script, and then that should be able to export each PO file individually. So that's something I'll keep in mind, and I'll try to create a script moving forward with a sequel to export from Excel to separate PO files. Should be doable. Input and gamepad support. Yeah. Okay, yeah. This was the worst. This was the absolute fucking worst. I hate it. I hate everything about it. But I know that it was largely our implementation of it that was the problem, and not implementation. The implementation itself that is the problem. It's how we did it, and I think that we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the proper way to handle it is. The input was fine. It worked until we needed gamepad support. The input and gamepad support bugs caused by far the most amount of delay and frustration from my side. It wasted so much time. There were so many bugs. There are probably still bugs related to it in the game, and it feels held together by bandages. This won't work. This will not work. We cannot do the same thing for a sequel, so it's not even it's not even part of the question of should we improve it or should we find a new way to do it. We will find a new way to do it. Gamepad support was hacked in with the UI navigation plugin, but the widgets weren't created properly to support it. Again, this is something that we would have discovered and handled if we had done a proper vertical slice, like we knew that we should have done, and we didn't do it for some stupid reason. Bugs with navigation from UI's side as well, mixed in with our own bugs, exacerbated implementation and testing. That's not something small either. There were bugs with UI's navigation that for some reason, here's an example, if you multi-edit widgets with navigation, it would reset the navigation, even if you didn't touch the navigation in the edit, right? Let's say you were adjusting the look of multiple widgets, and just by compiling and saving those visual changes, you have now reset the navigation on those widgets, which I didn't discover until, quite a ways in, and that just was an annoyance that caused bugs. Messes with focus and navigation caused issue after issue that still seems to barely be working. It's held up by strings and duct tape. Sequel will need correct widget library and full Steam input API support from day one, no exceptions. This is something that we need to handle. We need to do it correctly, and we need to do it in a way that is scalable and replicable, and that we can take from project to project to project. So some plugin or whatever of our own, or even just project files that we can copy and paste into a new project for our widgets and our Steam input API support will be necessary. And now we know that. Steam page and backend support. Steam's backend was great to work with, well documented, and relatively user-friendly. I had a good time working with it. There were a lot of little things to keep in mind and to look through, a lot of menus, but ultimately I think that their checklists over here were really, really helpful in understanding, okay, I don't have this, and it links me to the page and then tells me exactly what I need to do or the purpose of what I'm doing is, and then I can just fill it out, add in what I need, and it's done. I really, really enjoyed working with it. However, it was a lot more work than I expected, especially artistically. There were way more checklists than I ever imagined, and honestly, it still seems wild to me that some slop creators on Steam are able to get through these checklists because there are a lot of them. We learned that there are hard requirements per project before store pages can go live and a release date can be set. Ideally, primarily, it was the 2-week wait between your store page being live, saying coming soon or at least coming soon, and then having a release date that you could actually release on. And in order to do that, you need your store page approved for release. So this is something that we will need to think about in more time, think about ahead in more time than we did for this game. We did forget to set redistributables and incorrectly listed both Spanish locales, both of which failed our first build review. So we are in the second build review with those 2 problems fixed, and I don't think that those will be a problem. Additionally, Steam recommends some controller support best practices that, due to our shoddy implementation, we were unable to implement, but I would like to implement those for the second game. Things like if you open up the Steam overlay, the game should pause. This is a best practice that they list. Or if you open up if you go back to big picture mode and then resume, the game should have been paused when you go back to big picture mode. There should be some ways to do these callbacks from Steam's API, so this is something that we will need to implement for the sequel. Moving on to task management with U-Track. It wasn't used early enough. We went from the game jam to full implementation and just kind of communicated back and forth through Discord. It wasn't very good. Due to an already hurried timeline, task descriptions were minimal and Kanban swim lanes were poor. We kind of just threw up the task, barely wrote in a description if even, and then didn't assign it or really apply a priority to it, and it was very shoddy. It was not very good. Development should have been broken into proper stages instead of blindly rushing for the release date. Again, this is another issue that was exacerbated by this desire to rush through the production. And similar problems existed with version control, but I think we did version control okay. We started by taking the Jam project and throwing it up on Diversion to try it out. It was pretty frustrating. I didn't like Diversion. And so we moved it over to Plastic, which is more expensive because it does cost us a bit, but it is more familiar and has better tooling, and I think ultimately has just worked more reliably for me than Diversion did. The problem is, not enough education was passed on to Rex about version control since he was new to it entirely, which was very rude and unwise of me, so that is something that we're going to rectify for the sequel, is to first take time to teach him proper usage of version control and task management software, and that way when we're jumping into it and starting to use it from the start, we will be on the same page with how to use it and our standards of using it as a company. Communication. This leads us into communication, which was not good. It was spotty, sometimes good, sometimes bad. A lot of work for art was done with little communication from the start, so it was thrown into the project. There wasn't a lot of whole asking about how it was, or is this okay, is this something we should do, and that did cause a lot of iteration or a lot of confusion. It wasted a lot of time, and we need to improve upon that. It did improve near the end after we had discussed some things, not in the greatest of ways, but it did start to improve, just it was, too late at that point. I was too focused on the streams and my own work that I didn't accurately convey the project's needs to Rex. My messages to Rex were often terse and overly rude, highlighting a need to ensure less overwork. I'm not trying to excuse what was said or what was done, and it's not like there's some smoking gun behind the screens here. Just generally speaking, there wasn't communication, so something was done that wasn't what we needed to have done, and then I would respond to that in a way that I don't think was very proper, and it was fixed, but it was, causing delays or an issue, and then I would have to fix it in my overtime after work, And this all could have been avoided from the start had we just accepted the timeline, taken the time, talked and communicated, figured it out, we're on the same page with things, and then move forward, and not moving forward and then try to rectify those issues and miscommunications later on. So a more proper pipeline for production will ensure that we're healthy and taking the breaks that we need. That cannot be understated. That will be happening with the sequel. Employees number 3 and 4, yeah, that's our HR department. Our HR is actually larger than the game's development. Could you elaborate on selection of version control software? Yes. Additionally, by the way, I failed to take the time needed to teach Rex, prioritizing work over growth. That's always a mistake. So, Rex and I have already talked, and with Cuthbert too, and we've said, first thing we need to do before we even do any pre-production is teach people how we're using our version control, how we're using our task management, and then get everybody on the same page with that. That is necessary before we even move to pre-production. Speaking of production, the general production of the game. And these were like kind of some miscellaneous points or just some conglomeration of thoughts about the general production of the game as a whole. It would have been beneficial to collaborate on a mood board before meshing to avoid unnecessary iterations. When Rex had contacted me saying he had some ideas for how the game could look, honestly, they were very different from how I kind of thought they should look, and I was okay with it in the end, but again, we should have collaborated on a mood board and said, this is how we want it to look. Okay, this is doable, this is too complex, blah, 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 blah. And then we can start meshing because then we're both on the same page. So again, failure to communicate properly. 2 weeks wasn't enough time for the achievement artist, as she mentioned, so we'll need to plan those more in advance for the sequel. And the biggest one, streaming all 5 days of the week left a lot of work for after the stream that couldn't be done live, making me overwork most days, especially weekend. Within the last 2 months, I've worked pretty much every single weekend, sometimes both days, and usually it was the full day of work, not just like a couple of hours. I can't be doing that, so we're gonna have to find a way to produce the game in a way that I can be more flexible about taking days off if they're needed, and just accept that this is going to ruin the kind of the normal way that we do things, which is that we stream every weekday from 9 to 4, right? Yeah, we just need to be more flexible is what it needs to happen, and I think that might end up being that we stream maybe 4 days a week, or some weeks even 3 days a week. I'm gonna try to set those up in more time than I usually do, but sometimes you can't really predict that the work that you need to do in that moment is going to be work that is off stream. So I will try to be more proactive about sharing that schedule with you guys. And if at any point on stream want to see the streaming schedule, you can type !schedule, but I'll put it below the stream too, so that you guys can be very up to date on when we are streaming and when not. And probably be more proactive on Discord about mentioning it as well. But I want to do more work off stream. That's just, once in a while it's fine, it's necessary, but I don't want to have to spend every fucking day ending the stream, going home, doing more work, which frustrates my wife. And then on the weekends when we want to spend time together, I have to go into work and do more work off stream. It wasn't good, but it had to be done to get this game out, so we did it, and now we learn from that. Pricing and release. Only time will tell if the decision to make the game free will pay off in the future, but I didn't feel right charging more than $1 to $2 for the game by the end. And as I mentioned in one of our YouTube videos, I will never price a game at a cost that I wouldn't pay myself. Simple as that. So if I don't feel that it's right to charge $20 for a game that we put out, we won't charge $20. We'll charge whatever I feel comfortable paying for the game that we've made. many fights with White? It didn't cause any fights. It was just more like, you have more work to do this weekend? Okay. Yeah, pricing of a game, by the way, reflects my mistakes with the game's production, not any mistake that the other people who worked on it did. However, one good thing is that the release date feels well scheduled between sales, but we should plan this way further ahead of time in the future. And not just say, oh, the game's done. Let's find a date on Steam. This one looks pretty cool. Let's go with it. This needs to be professionally planned out. We need to get tasks done so the store page and build are accepted, and then set a release date, and not worry about the release date and then trying to get the store page and build done before that. So, success or failure? What do you guys think in chat? Was Coin Pusher Reloaded a success or was it a failure? And this is a trick question because there is a correct answer to this. Obviously, it was a success. I mean, the game released, and it's not a bad game. You know, but we can do better. Yeah, we got it out, right, Rex? We got it out. We learned a lot from this project. We got it out. It was released. And I'll tell you what, most games do not release. Most of them do not. Arguably speaking, 90% of games never release. So we succeeded. But we can do better than this. And I don't hate the quality of Coin Push Reloaded. I just wish that we had more gameplay to it. And it was deeper. And we did certain things better during production, or that we handled game input and input stuff better. That's fine. That's fine. That's fixable. We can do that. The game is not released yet, Lepis. For this game, we learned a lot, and that's more important than any sales metric. I don't care how many downloads we get. More importantly to me is if people like the game, they like what we've done, and they want to see more. That's it. So we're going to take all the lessons that we've learned from this. We're going to take the feedback that we get from Coin Pusher Reloaded, and we're going to funnel all of that into a properly done sequel where we can start to straighten out and build a foundation and understanding of our pipeline here at Microraptor, because every game company's pipeline is going to look different, and we need to find our way of making games, and we need to learn as much as we can about production and getting that game from finish to release. And that's usually work that is not relegated to people like me or Rex, right, in a bigger company. The designer, the 3D artist, or like Kotspur with his programming, this is something that we don't have to learn about or do at bigger companies because we have people who are meant to do that while we do our jobs. So this is something that we have to learn ourselves and then, you know, commit to memory and then build our own understanding as a company of how we're making games. Strengths and weaknesses. We have things that we sucked at, things that we had some problems with, and other things that we did well. So obviously we sucked at gamepad and input. The game was fine until we needed to add gamepad, and then it exposed all of our flaws. That needs to be fixed. Not starting a fresh project. This is something we knew we should have done, and we didn't do. Never again. Never again. Coin Pusher Reloaded is the poster child for why we should do what we say that we should do, and not just ignore it and do what we want to do. Rushing the production. This caused a lot of problems, a lot of unnecessary amount of overwork and stress and miscommunications. We're not doing that, not for a sequel. And of course the communication was just largely non-existent, so we've already set up a proper internal channel on our Discord for this. We're going to be more communicative. I want to funnel every communication through that, and if, you know, handle task management more properly, as you see here with the we sucked. We're gonna fix all that. And then massive amounts of iterations. I think that was just a result, you know, it was a consequence of the failure to communicate properly, the failure to use task management correctly, and that rushing of the production ultimately just meant that we weren't doing things properly and therefore had to reiterate over and over and over and over. You're right, Lepus. We can learn about marketing too from this. But I think that ultimately we need to just do marketing correctly in the future. We'll see. We have a lot to learn. A lot more to learn. We had problems with the design. I don't think the design was perfect, but it also wasn't horrible. We took a Game Jam's contained design. Step 2, question mark, because we didn't do anything with it. And then step 3, we released with that design. However, what it did teach me too is something that I found out through streaming for many years, is if I had 100% of my time to design, like I would normally have at like any other company, I can design away, right? I can spend all of my thought on designing a game. When I have to stream and develop a game on stream, honestly, I have like 5% of my time that is spent designing, which really, really sucks. So I think that we can find a way to produce our games in a way that allots actual time for me to spend on 100% designing. And then I can take that design into the prototyping, and then we can build from there. So I need to be more proactive about actually scheduling design time and not thinking that that's boring content. I think it's kind of boring for you guys to watch me design stuff, but maybe that's okay, and maybe we just need to accept that that is what needs to happen. So fuck it. If it ends up in lower viewership or you guys find it boring, I just shouldn't care, because it needs to happen, and it's going to make the game better, so it's a positive thing in the long run. Sound effects and VFX, you know, it's not our strength, so we can do better with that. And you know, we're going to take a look into both of those things for a sequel. Probably try to do them a bit better, even if we need to outsource a sound designer for a little bit. Can do. Code base as well. This was a problem with building upon a you know, not starting a fresh project, right? So if we had started with a fresh project, we could have built a proper code base instead of building upon a Game Jam's code base. Not smart. Scene lighting, we were learning. I don't think that we could have prepared for this problem, but we can now. So we learned a lot about lighting and with Lumen during the project, and ultimately we can improve upon that for a sequel. And then version control usage. I think that moving to plastic was smarter, but we still need to share more education with Rex and anyone else who works in the game about how we use version control and best practices for that. And then we can kind of work more independently at that point once we all understand what needs to happen and in which order things need to happen. Things we did well. The initial Game Jam. Honestly, the Game Jam went fine. I have no problems with how the Game Jam worked. It was the moving from the Game Jam to production that was the biggest and initial mistake that probably exacerbated every little thing. Rushing and not starting a fresh project. If we had not done those two things, most of these problems probably would have not been that big. You're still scared to press stuff, and yeah, well, we're gonna do that. We will absolutely do that before we even jump into making a new project. Before any prototyping on Coin Pusher 2 is done, we need to fix like pretty much everything that's in the "we sucked" category. All that needs to be fixed before we jump into prototyping. Music was done well. I love the track that was made, and I would love to see more of that for a sequel. Localization support was something that I also feel went relatively without a hitch. Like maybe there were a couple problems during implementation to fix a couple of widgets, but I feel that overall we did well. And now I know in the back of my mind that when I'm designing the widgets, we need to make sure that they are scalable in a way that supports longer or shorter strings. So that was really good experience. Mesh quality was very good. Overall, we had mostly no problems with meshes, except for a little bit with coins, and I would say with the table itself. And Rex and I have no idea why the physics on the table were weird. We need to look into that, because that was something that we just had to fix with that white invisible square or cube. So it is what it is. Steam backend and store page I think look okay, and we did pretty well with that. We just need to take more time before jumping into releasing the game and getting it up on Steam than we did with this one. So that was a lesson learned. And ultimately, we released the game. Like, the game is out, or it's gonna be out. But the game it's gone gold. Steam ran the game just fine. We had to fix 2 problems. They're fixed, and the game build should be accepted by Steam this week, and we'll just see how it runs for people on their own computers. Now for a sequel. Coin Pusher 2 Electric Boogaloo. We want to do a sequel. We've already decided that we will be doing a sequel. So rather than jumping back into System Break, we are going to push that back and work on Coin Pusher 2, because we feel that we can take our knowledge and experience from Coin Pusher Reloaded into a sequel and make something even better. And this will give us a good way to test out our pipelines, that I think is a simpler game than System Break is. So we are going to do it. And we're going to treat this like a real game and production. No screwing around. And by that I mean, like, no, oh, let's just skip this phase, let's just skip this part, let's just get the game released, let's rush the production. No, we're going to take our time, we're going to do it properly, the way that we intended to do it for Golden Chronicles, and should have done it for Coin Pusher Reloaded, but didn't, because we felt that it was a smaller game, and we don't need to, treat it too seriously. Let's just get it out, let's just, get it finished. We're going to do it properly this time, the way that we intended to do it. And we want a game that neither Rex or I feels guilty about charging $5 to $10 for. And for us, that's a high bar to exceed. I am speaking for Rex in this matter, but I think that he'll agree with me. We didn't feel right about charging what we did for the game. And when we make a sequel, we want to put it out and not have to feel that we are cheating people. Let's put it that way. Joseph, I feel like I'm in a board meeting. Post-mortems are kind of dry like that. Welcome, though. Rex will be brought in as a more official member of Microraptor. So, I think that's pretty big news for him. We want to include him more directly into our discussions. And when we run through things internally, we want to include Rex in those discussions. Of course, he is in a different country, and me and Kotspur have been in the same country, so it's easier for us to meet up and talk over like a coffee or something. But we will be keeping notes about things that we talk about and then including him in that. That's what we're going to be doing moving forward. Congratulations, Rex. You are now getting a salary of exactly the same as me and Kotspur, so $0. One day, Mom. One day, we'll make some money. The level of quality felt in Coin Pusher Reloaded is the baseline, but I know we can exceed that. I don't think that the quality of Coin Pusher Reloaded is bad. I think that this game actually looks, feels, and sounds pretty good, especially for being worked on by, like a couple of people. But I think that we can improve upon this. I think we can do better. It doesn't look bad, but it can look better, and it can feel better. The same as every solo dev out there, right? So we'll improve upon this, 100%. And pre-production will begin soon. We're going to be focusing on design, gamepad and inputs, standardizing task management and version control usage, and using our intended production pipeline from Golden Chronicles. So that's just telling you guys what's going to happen. Obviously on our calendar, we have this free week, and then next week, Tuesday, we're jumping into Metal Gear Delta, which sounds a bit weird, but actually during the playtime of Metal Gear Delta, me, Rex, and Kotspur are going to be talking about the pre-production for Coin Pusher 2, designing it, theorizing some ideas for it, talking about what we can do, what we can't do, and then we're going to probably have some internal discussions and education about task management, version control, and gamepad and input support stuff. So a lot of boring stuff behind the screen for you guys, but very important things for us to move forward in a proper way. And that's the end. Coin Push Reloaded releases on September 4th on Steam for free. Thank you, Cyber, for the follow. I appreciate that. I hope you guys enjoyed the post-mortem. And if you have anything to add to it, by all means, right now is the perfect time for you to say your piece. What did you like about our production? What did you fucking hate about it? What have you wanted to say about the game that you have held back or so long from saying because you felt that it can't be said? This is a no hate zone. If you have anything that you want to say that you thought looked really bad, or that you thought we rushed through, or things that you thought went well and that you actually liked about it, by all means put it here. This is a very honest and open part. I wish I didn't miss deadline. I think, Rex, the issue is that I didn't communicate the deadline. I chose the deadline myself without consulting you, and ultimately the deadline was rushed. This shouldn't have happened. So we need to properly phase out the production of the sequel in a way that we are all clear about the intended dates, the milestones of those phases, and the features that we want in each of those milestones, so that we have a better idea of what we're delivering in the next week or two, what it's going to contribute to, and then when the phase is actually going to end, and then that should be finished, right? So this was just one of those things that happened because we rushed it, we didn't schedule anything, we didn't have proper phases, and it kind of just trickled down. And this is a good example in a very small game of exactly why everything that I told you should do for when we were talking about Colden Chronicles and, you know, making the milestone plan for that is exactly what we should have done for this game. I don't know why I didn't decide to do it for this game, but we didn't decide to do it the right way, and therefore we had a lot of problems behind the scenes. I guess I'm a hypocrite is what it comes down to. But we're gonna fix that and do things the right way for the sequel. No more excuses for that. If that's it, that's the end of our post-mortem slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it. It was maybe not the most traditional post-mortem slideshow, but our game was so small, I felt like this would work just fine. I think I'm speaking for all members of the board. What are our new investment opportunities with all the changes to the company coming up? Being very much a corporate, as our sole member LLC here on Microraptor Games, we're gonna be making a sequel and doing things in the most proper way. Our biggest mistakes were from the beginning, taking a game jam idea and turning it into a full product. We knew better and just didn't do it because I naively thought that we could finish up the game pretty easily, slap some new meshes into it, and just get the game released. I think ultimately what didn't work with that initial idea was the idea to make gamepad support, because without gamepad support, I think that we could have gotten away with a lot less, and localization support, which did add a good bit of overhead to the project as well. But I think that both of these were positive. I think both of these were better in the game than out of the game. But our production choices early on didn't support these two things, so they felt like they were like just pasted on, right, with hot glue or super glue, and weren't feeling like they were a cohesive part of the entire production. So I want those two things for the sequel as well, but I want them to feel like they were actually properly designed from the beginning, and therefore going from shoddy game jam implementation to actual sequel, we need to do things the way that we intended to do them for our previous title, Golden Chronicle. Did we have any draft documentation for the project nailed down at the beginning? No, we didn't. No, we didn't because we just built a game jam and then decided to move on from that. And I think that that was, it was really stupid. It was really stupid. Like I said, we knew better. We had talked for years about what the proper implementation cycle for a game was, and just, I don't know why, I just decided not to do it for this one. And that was my mistake. I think a lot of people have problems with UI. I'm considering making a tutorial for UI soon because even YouTube doesn't have any really good ones, I think. You mean for like design or for handling UI with mouse and keyboard and gamepad? I mean, generally I agree with you though. It's really easy to throw a widget in game, especially one that works with keyboard and mouse. But if you want to start implementing hierarchies and widget children in a proper way that works, especially with gamepad and focus, man, it feels like a completely different game. Design and gamepad support. Yeah, the gamepad support is nasty. I mean, that was a... Oof. Yeah, Rex, you're gonna have to do the... You're gonna have to do the presentation for us with gamepad, with your UI, and then we're gonna have to see what can work and what can't work, and then how we can tie in Steam Input API support to it. Because we initially wanted to do Steam Input API, but Hotspur and I looked into it in the backend, and it would have required a complete refactor of the entire game's UI and input, like everything. So we felt that it would be better to forego implementation of that in this game and then do that properly from scratch day one in the sequel. And I hope that that will have better results. I mean, literally anything would be better results than what we have in the game currently. That was good. Alright, I can end the YouTube recording for the post-mortem there. I hope you guys enjoyed it on YouTube. And I guess we'll have news about the sequel probably early September. Maybe a little bit after the release of Coin Pusher Reloaded. And we'll talk about what our initial ideas are for the scope, for the design, and how some of the pre-production is already going. And then when it's time for us to actually start the development streams of that game, we will just add that to the schedule. But I don't have a date for that yet, so I will keep you updated. Either way, hope you enjoyed it. Take care, YouTube.